When I thought about what to talk about and how to make use of this time, I thought, well, maybe I'll tell a bit of a story of my life.
Mist clinging low to the treetops, the faint groan of wind sliding between the long-leaf pines. Even the crows sounded half asleep as they cawed in the distance, their calls swallowed by the valley. Turtle Island Preserve was waking slowly, stretching under the pale light of dawn. For 3 decades, this land had been Eustace Conway's sanctuary, a living relic cut away from the modern world, a place where time seemed to run backward, where machines went quiet, and the earth still spoke in its own patient language. But that morning, something else stirred beneath the soil, something that didn't belong to mist or wind or forest. Environmental inspectors had come for a routine assessment after a winter of heavy rains shifted the ground near the main homestead. They expected mud, roots, damp clay, nothing more than nature settling itself back into place. But when their instruments began scanning beneath the cabin's southern wall, the readings came back wrong. Not rock, not compacted earth, not even the hollow of an animal den. It was a void, a space almost 10 feet down. The inspectors exchanged glances. They checked the equipment again. Same reading. A hollow chamber where no chamber should exist. One man joked about buried treasure. Another suggested erosion. But when they drove a probe into the soil, the sound that echoed back wasn't the soft thud of dirt. It was the sharp crack of wood. Confusion turned to unease. They cleared more earth, slate, and root until the outline of something rectangular began to form. A hatch, hand-hewn, sealed tight with wax and rope, reinforced by rusted nails that looked older than the cabin itself. Nails that hadn't tasted sunlight in decades. They stopped digging. None of them wanted to be the one to open it. Then Eustace arrived. He walked toward them from the tree line, his boots leaving almost no imprint in the damp earth. His face was unreadable. His eyes caught the morning light like old amber. He studied the exposed hatch for a long, silent minute, while the inspectors waited, unsure whether to speak. Finally, Eustace brushed his hand along the edge of the wood, feeling the grain as if it were an old friend. His voice was quiet when he finally said, "Be careful what you dig up." Some things were built to stay quiet. Still, he didn't stop them. He only stepped back as they pried it open. The hinges screamed. A heavy breath of cold air rushed upward, stale and metallic, thick enough to raise goosebumps along their arms. Flashlights cut into the dark below, illuminating a ladder leading downward into a narrow passage carved by human hands. Dust spiraled through the beam like ash falling in slow motion. One inspector whispered, "This isn't natural." Another muttered, "Someone built this." Eustace didn't answer. He just stared into the darkness, his expression unreadable, because whatever waited beneath his cabin hadn't been disturbed in decades. And now, the mountain had finally decided to give it back. To understand the room waiting beneath the soil, you must first understand the man who built the world above it. For years, Eustace Conway was a myth made flesh, a barefoot philosopher, a relic of a country most people only experienced through history books. They called him the last American man, a traveler who rode horses across entire states, a craftsman who lived off the land with the skill of a 19th century pioneer, and a teacher who believed that technology had numbed the human spirit. Turtle Island Preserve was the beating heart of that belief. 1,000 acres of wilderness carved into trails, fields, workshops, hide tanning racks, and shelters made from fallen timber. To visitors, it was a step into the past. To Eustace, it was the only future that still made sense. He taught people how to track deer, how to read the wind, how to build a fire from nothing but stone and instinct. He often said, "The earth doesn't belong to us, we belong to it." Those words lived in him so deeply that even his closest apprentices sometimes felt he was more part of the forest than a resident of it. But those same apprentices noticed something shifting in him over the past few years. Eustace began spending longer hours alone in the woods, sometimes disappearing for days, returning covered in dirt and ash with no explanation except a mutter, "I'm working on something." His lessons grew quieter. His gaze was more distant. He spoke of soil memory, the language of roots, the energy buried beneath the ground. It wasn't madness, it was meditation, as if he were listening to something nobody else could hear. Once, an apprentice caught him sketching diagrams by lantern light. When asked what he was drawing, Eustace closed the journal and simply said, "A place to study what the world forgets." Rumors formed easily around a man like him, but no one pressed. Mystery was part of Eustace's gravity. He didn't seek attention. He didn't chase cameras despite his fame from the show Mountain Men. He only chased meaning, chasing it deeper into the land he trusted more than the world above. And now, as the inspectors stood over an underground hatch they never expected to find, those years of odd behavior finally made sense. Because Eustace hadn't just been teaching the old ways, he had been building something beneath the surface. Something older than Turtle Island itself, something he believed the world would one day need. The investigators descended one by one, boots sinking into soil that hadn't been disturbed since before any of them were born. The air was still, dense with the smell of old earth and something metallic, like a forgotten workshop swallowed by time. The passage was narrow, just wide enough for one man at a time, carved smooth by a patient hand. When the last inspector reached the bottom, his flashlight swept across a room that froze every breath in his chest. This wasn't erosion, this wasn't an animal burrow, this was architecture. The chamber stretched nearly 30 feet across, its walls reinforced with heavy beams of chestnut and oak, species of wood long extinct from modern construction. The craftsmanship wasn't crude. It was deliberate, symmetrical, almost reverent, like a shrine to forgotten skills. The floor was packed earth, cool underfoot, and the ceiling curved like the inside of a buried cathedral. Along the left wall, shelves had been carved directly into the clay, lined with jars filled with herbs, dried roots, oils, pieces of flint, and bundles of twine. Parchment rolls tied with twine rested neatly in rows, everything arranged with a precision that suggested not panic, but purpose. A simple cot sat in the corner beside a small table made from reclaimed barnwood. A lantern hung from a wooden peg above it, the wick long dry. On the table lay a hand-forged knife, a leather strop, and clay pots labeled in faded charcoal. Beans, salt, ash. Nothing suggested fear. Nothing hinted at an emergency. This was no bunker, it was a living space, or had been. One inspector pressed his hand against the wall, surprised by its solidity. Reinforced clay intertwined with timber and saplings, built to last decades. That was when another man called out. His flashlight had caught something near the far wall, a crude ventilation system made from hollowed saplings tied together with cord. Ingenious primitive engineering designed to draw fresh air from above without any modern piping. A pulley system overhead connected to a wooden fan powered not by electricity but by counterweights of stone. The room exhaled slowly, like a giant sleeping underground. The inspectors exchanged stunned glances. This wasn't the work of survivalists or conspiracy theorists. This was craftsmanship on the level of ancient dwellings, except it had been built by one man living in the 21st century, Eustace Conway. Above them, he stood at the hatch, just a silhouette framed in daylight, watching silently. "Did you build this?" one inspector finally asked. His voice echoed off the underground walls. After a long pause, Eustace answered softly, "Not recently," and the way he said it made the room feel even colder. Because whatever this place was, whoever had begun it, Eustace had taken up the work, finished it, or continued it in secret. They catalogued every corner, every object, careful not to disturb anything. And then they found what changed the entire tone of the investigation. A wooden chest hidden behind a beam, sealed with wax. Inside were journals, dozens of them, hand-stitched, weathered by time, filled with the looping handwriting of a man who lived between worlds. The first inscription read, "If the world forgets how to live, I'll teach it again from beneath the roots." The investigators realized they weren't standing in a shelter. They were standing in a philosophy, a message carved under the mountain, a blueprint for something the world wasn't meant to see, at least not yet. They brought the chest to the center of the chamber and set it on the barnwood table. The lid resisted at first. Wax cracked and flaked from the seams like dried bark. When it finally gave, the sound was small but heavy, like a door opening somewhere much deeper than the room they stood in. Inside, the journals lay stacked carefully, each one wrapped in cloth that had yellowed with age. The leather covers were dark and worn smooth at the edges, as if they had been handled many times before they were finally put away. One inspector slid a notebook free, the pages crinkling softly as he opened it. The first page held a single line of ink, written in that same looping hand they recognized from Eustace's notes on the surface. "If the world forgets how to live, I'll teach it again, from beneath the roots." The room fell quiet. Even the faint whisper of air through the sapling vents seemed to dim. They turned the pages slowly. At first, the entries looked like field notes, dates, temperatures, humidity readings. soil moisture levels, sketches of root structures, cross-sections of earth layers, maps of Turtle Island from angles no one had ever seen on any brochure. It was as if Eustace had been documenting not just the land he walked on, but the skin of the planet itself. More pages revealed experiments, how long water could stay clear when stored underground, how air felt at different depths, how sound traveled below the surface compared to above. Scribbled beside one drawing of the chamber, a line read, "The earth has its own breath. You can hear it when you stand still long enough." Then the journals shifted tone. The careful numbers gave way to paragraphs, long flowing reflections written in the dim light of a lantern. "I came down here to see how long a man can live on what he remembers. The noise above is too loud. The ground is quieter. Down here you can hear what's real. The air feels older. It doesn't rush. It waits." Another entry spoke of time. "Up there, the days fall like leaves in a storm. Down here, they don't fall at all. They just stretch. You eat when you're hungry. You sleep when your body leans toward the cot. The clock is the temperature. The clock is the drip of water in the corner. The clock is your own heartbeat." The investigators weren't reading the paranoia of a man hiding from society. They were reading the logbook of someone conducting an experiment on himself, using his own life as the control group. He wasn't just trying to survive in the dark. He was analyzing what it meant to exist with almost nothing. There were passages about silence, about how the forest's movements still reached him through the soil, the tremor of a deer's hooves, the distant roll of thunder, the faint vibration of rain sinking in. He described it as listening to the earth from the inside, as if he'd decided that to truly understand nature, you had to live where roots did, not where roofs did. One entry was underlined twice. "The earth breathes slower than man. If you want to learn from it, you have to match its pace. You have to let your pulse fall to its rhythm." The more they read, the clearer it became that this was not a panic shelter. It was a classroom for one, a buried monastery of thought where Eustace had gone to test a single question. Can a human being live in balance with the land without any dependency on the infrastructure that has surrounded us for generations? But scattered between the musings were hints of something more. Rough sketches of other rooms, arrows pointing into blank spaces labeled future chamber notes about deeper workings, and Phase 2. What they had seen so far was not the whole design. It was only the first layer. In the margin of one page, next to a crude diagram of interlocking circles, Eustace had written, "This is not an escape, this is a rehearsal." The inspectors closed the journal and looked up at the dim, earthen ceiling. Rehearsal for what? The answer, they realized, lay farther underground, and the path to it waited in the shadows at the edge of their flashlight beams. Near the back of the chamber, the wall narrowed into a low tunnel, just tall enough for a man to stoop and walk through with his head bowed. The entryway was reinforced with extra timbers, darker and thicker than the others, as if someone had understood this section would bear more weight than the rest. One by one, the investigators ducked inside. The clay walls brushed close to their shoulders. The air cooled. The flashlight swept ahead, spilling light into a second space that felt different the moment they stepped into it. The first room felt like a dwelling. This one felt like a workshop. The ground here was more compacted, the soil underfoot firm as if it had been tamped down again and again. Wooden beams crisscrossed overhead in a careful lattice, and from them hung crude devices. Ropes, pulleys, counterweights, carved from stone. It looked like an inventor's attic had been transplanted underground and stripped of every modern material. A wheel sat against one wall, fashioned from reclaimed boards, its rims smoothed with patient effort. When one inspector pushed it gently, the wheel turned, and a series of ropes tightened overhead, pulling on a wooden fan mounted in a vent in the wall. Air stirred faintly, flowing past their cheeks. No electricity, no hidden motor, just gravity, friction, and patience. Another device crouched in the corner where a small underground trickle of water slipped through a crack in the rock. Wooden paddles had been set into the flow, turning as the stream pushed past. Their motion transferred to a shaft that powered yet another small fan. It was a system, not pretty, not polished, but undeniably functional. Pinned to the wall above the trickle was a sheet of parchment, its edges curled from humidity, but the ink was still sharp enough to read. Continuity of function without dependency. Below the title, Eustace had drawn arrows and circles, mapping out the way motion could be borrowed from simple forces, water, falling weight, human effort, and turned into small but constant work pumps, airflow, lift. None of it required fuel. None of it relied on a grid. In the margin, another line had been added later in a tighter hand. Technology should serve life, not replace it. The inspectors exchanged looks they didn't have words for. They had seen improvised systems before, in disaster zones and off-grid encampments. But this was different. This didn't come from panic. It came from principle, from someone trying to prove a theory, that you could reimagine technology using only what the Earth already offered. On another wall hung broken metal pieces that had been melted and reshaped into crude gears. They were not elegant, but they meshed, they worked. A hand crank turned them with a soft grind, pulling a weight up and letting it drop again in slow cycles. Energy captured and released over and over. Nothing here was decorative. Everything had a purpose. One inspector, a veteran of emergency infrastructure work, shook his head slowly. "This is engineering," he murmured. "Old-world engineering. No power, no fuel, just physics and stubbornness." At the far end of the workshop, half hidden in shadow, stood the door. Unlike the timber of the walls, this door was faced with bands of iron, hammered and curved to fit the shape of the wood beneath. The surface bore marks that weren't any alphabet the inspectors recognized at first glance, circles intersected with straight lines, symbols with roots in something older, not decoration, not random. The closer they stepped, the colder the air felt. "Another room?" one of them asked. Above them, through the packed earth, they could still feel the weight of the cabin. Somewhere up there, Eustace waited, as if listening to every move they made. One of the men raised his voice toward the ceiling. "What's back here?" It took several seconds before Eustace's answer came, his voice descending through earth as if it had been buried with the chamber itself. "That room's for when the world ends," he said quietly. Silence settled in after that. Heavy, thick. The inspectors looked at the door again, at the iron bands, at the symbols carved into the wood. Some part of them wanted to turn around, to report what they'd already found, and let someone else be the first to step through. But the law didn't care about symbols. An underground structure of this size demanded inspection, documentation, understanding. Hands tightened around metal latches streaked with rust. The hinges groaned when they turned. The door opened inward, and a breath of air rolled out that was colder than the chamber behind them, tinged with the faintest scent of something living. Not dead, not stale, living. They raised their lights and stepped through the threshold. The first thing they noticed was the light. It was dim, but it was there. Not the harsh white of bulbs, not the diffuse warmth of lantern flame. It was softer, almost ghostly, clinging in patches along the walls. When their eyes adjusted, they saw it for what it was. Moss. Thin sheets of pale green clung to the packed earth, glowing faintly, as if someone had caught starlight and pinned it underground. It coated the curves of the walls in uneven strokes, glowing brightest in the cracks and crevices where moisture collected. One of the inspectors stepped closer, raising his flashlight, then lowering it again to see the moss's true color. It pulsed with a quiet luminescence that made the room feel like the inside of some living lung. In the center of the space sat a table carved from a single slab of rough pine. Its surface was crowded with notebooks, loose pages, and small instruments made from bone, wood, and scrap metal. Beside it, shelves had been built into the earth again, but these were not lined with food or tools. They held soil. Glass jars sat in rows, each filled with dirt of different shades and textures. Some were almost black, dense and rich. Others were light and sandy. Each was labeled in careful handwriting with a date, a location, an elevation, a moisture percentage. Turtle Island Ridge, North Slope, Stream Bank. Early thaw, lower pasture, post-flood. Next to them lay containers of seeds, some common, some unrecognizable, each with a note attached. Light required? None. Germination temp. Estimated root depth. Observed at depth. They realized, slowly, that this room was not about hiding. It was about growing. Near the far wall, a shallow trench had been dug into the earth, lined with stones and filled with a dark, damp mix of soil. Vines trailed along it, pale but alive. Leaves stretched toward a small device mounted above them. A series of mirrors and reflective surfaces sat within a shaft carved upward, angled with obsessive precision. One inspector traced the direction with his light. The shaft led straight up toward the surface. "Sunlight," he murmured. "He's trying to bend sunlight down here." The system was crude, but ingenious. Even a few seconds of light each day would strike that upper mirror, bounce downward, hit the next, and scatter in fractured rays across the plants below. Just enough to convince them that somewhere above the weight of the mountain, the sky still existed. Pinned to the wall beside the shaft was another scrap of paper. If we can't live on the surface, we must teach life to live below it. The notebooks on the table confirmed the purpose. Pages documented growth rates of plants kept in near total darkness, comparing those nourished by faint reflected light to those kept by bioluminescent moss alone. Charts tracked humidity levels, root development, nutrient cycling in confined soil systems. It was an underground ecosystem, not imagined, but tested. One inspector flipped through a notebook and stopped at a page ringed in dirt-smudged fingerprints. At the top, Eustace had written, "This is not to hide from the world. It is to learn how to live when it ends." Beneath the sentence were sketches of more chambers, more plant beds, more moss cultures, notes about fungi cultivated for protein in absence of sunlight, experiments in capturing condensation from breath and soil evaporation, attempts to create a closed loop of water and nutrients that could sustain life deep beneath the surface. In the corner of the room, a small box sat half open. Inside were jars similar to those on the walls, but these held samples of the glowing moss in different stages, some bright, some fading, each labeled Light Harvest with dates and brief comments. One simply read promising, another not stable enough yet. The investigators stood in the quiet hum of the room, listening to the faint drip of water from somewhere above, watching the subtle tremble of leaves that had never felt wind. One of them spoke barely louder than a whisper. "He wasn't trying to escape anything," he said. "He's trying to build a way back, for whoever comes after." They looked again at the markings carved on the iron-banded door they'd passed through. The circles, the lines, they were not symbols of warning, but of cycles of continuity, birth, decay, rebirth. On the wall opposite the table, another message had been scratched into the earth. The letters were smaller here, but carved deep, as if Eustace had wanted to make sure they outlasted everything else in the room. When the surface forgets, the roots remember. It was at that moment the investigators understood why Eustace had called this room one for the end of the world. It wasn't because he expected to lock himself down here and wait out the collapse. It was because he believed someone someday would need a starting point, a place where the earth had already been asked the hardest question of all. Can life begin again, even underground? And everything in this room was his attempt to listen to the answer.